Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Leverage, Season 2, Episode 12. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So the opening we had, it's interesting because I was like, isn't that almost like a direct parallel to how the Leverage team met Harry at the beginning of Leverage Redemption? So it's interesting, but basically a group that the Leverage team in London ended up getting busted by an Interpol agent, which obviously when I hear Interpol, I'm gonna say, I don't know whether they've just never reached out to them or they just don't have any, because I'm always just like, this would be a great, especially if we're introducing using Interpol, where is Sterling, hierarchy wise? It has been, at this point, 10 years. So he's advanced a lot more, I'm sure, because he's the conniving opportunist that he's always been. So either way, the London team basically we ended up finding out got set up on a job, and Parker was kind of upset the moment she found out that the team got busted, and the team got busted by an agent named Astrid, which she's like, oh yeah, I grew up in this museum, and then you see the portrait, the handover portrait of the father and the daughter, and it's Sophie, and you're like, oh, she's your daughter, essentially. But later on we find out it's stepdaughter, which I think makes that even more complicated, because it's like, well, if she's her, it's going to be complicated regardless if that was your birth child, but stepchild comes with a complication on its own right, because it's like, hey, I had a mom before you, and then you filled that void when maybe her mom died or something, and then you became her new mom, and you were a big part of her life, especially after potentially losing her mom. We don't know what those circumstances are about Astrid's biological mom, what that whole situation is, but it's yeah, you came into her life and you basically left her life at the same time, so it cuts. Once again, parental issues, leaving a child, stepchild or biological child, is going to cut deep. It's just the wounds are going to look a little different, but it's still just as deep wounds. Just they come out looking a little differently, essentially. So that was an interesting development. You're right, because what's her face from a couple episodes ago called it that the person that she felt like she abandoned was the person you abandoned, it was a daughter, wasn't it? It's yeah, and she nailed it on the head. You could tell by Sophie's, right? Because that lady is regardless of it all, Sophie met her match in that episode, because that lady was very, very good at reading Sophie. But initially, this is before Sophie knew all that. I love that Parker basically broke into everyone's house and packed their bags, and it's she's I didn't steal anything this time. It's wait, this time? And it's wait, have you broken into my place before? And she's yes. When you didn't respond to my text, and Brianna's you mean when I was I asleep? And Parker's yes, for hours. And it's yeah, how dare you sleep for hours? It's annoying. It's we actually don't know what Parker's always been an oddball human being, but the fact of the matter is we don't know what her sleep schedule is. She's a very wired human being. But knowing that she would have to go back to London, knowing about the specific museum, because it's right, her husband, that particular one was it was that section of the museum was kind of dedicated to her husband, wasn't it? With the Duke hangover, handover. I keep saying hangover. I think it's handover, not hangover, right? Either way, so she knew she was going to have to confront some stuff, and obviously had to go get Harry, who is being propositioned with kind of some legal jobs and stuff like that, which even Sophie knew that he would come back to them one day, which almost does feel like it's setting up Harry's exit, that Harry will if anything goes forward with this series, Harry won't be around. They're also doing it with Brianna too. They're setting up hey, you're going to have stuff outside of this too, and that's fine. Kind of feel like they might find other people to potentially fill those voids, but that's kind of a potential future thing. For right now, we're in this, and they go to London, and they're dealing with also the curator, which the moment I saw him, I got excited. It's the actor who played. I actually had to look up his character's name because it's been so long for like that. I mean, not so long, but the Outpost. But it's the actor who plays Janzo in the Outpost. I felt so bad that I forgot his name. Also, I think I talked about this before because I'd seen picture. It's wild to see him with facial hair just because throughout the entirety of the Outpost, which is the thing I've mainly known him from, he was always clean shaven as Janzo. So when I see him with facial hair, I mean, he looks exactly the same just with facial hair, but it kind of takes me back a second because I'm just not used to it. But obviously, this museum was very highly prepared. There's a lot of security and stuff like that. They've taken a lot of measures that because Astrid's really, really good at her job. And ultimately, I love that thing when Elliot was trying to get the key card or whatever off that security guard, and Brianna like pats him on the chest. And he's like, "You can't do that. When I take a card off a guy, you can't like pat his chest because it's gonna make him look down." She's like, "I'm sorry, I can't help it. He was so cute." But yeah, like what really set this all, like made it so fascinating is we find out Astrid and Parker are nemesis. She's like, that's my nemesis. Like she apparently, like her and Hardison, it's like she was always getting chased around by Astrid when they were kind of doing their thing around Europe. And it's like, oh, she's one of my nemesis. Well, in fact, I have a lot of nemesises, but I don't return the nemesis with my own, like, it's like they're my nemesis, but I'm not their nemesi, you know? And so I love that whole thing. But then it's also like, yeah, that's my stepdaughter. And it's like, wait, did you know about that whole thing? Which I am curious, did Sophie know about Parker and Astrid? She does seem like she has kept up with Astrid's life and everything, finding out what she did. And it's like, I think that is the beautiful irony of like, yeah, her stepmother was a world-renowned criminal, who's partnered up with her nemesis, which makes it even more poetically beautiful. But it's like, yeah, it is interesting how that ultimately all works out. But they have to do all this because the London team was hired by, it turns out, by Ramsey. He's at the centerfold of all of this. And so they ultimately end up finding out this is about some death mask that he made 30 years ago. It was a forgery and a fake. But the fact of the matter is, if it gets found out and he sold it through some legitimate means and stuff like that, it's going to be a domino effect and everyone's going to get a lot of people and it's going to do a lot of damage in the criminal world if he gets caught. So it's like, you know, and it's like, right, a lot of people are going to come looking for him. They're not just regular people. They're going to be rich people who are like, yeah, maybe we'll let the authorities handle it, or we'll hire someone to kill him ourselves. So Sophie ends up going to Billy for help, which Billy's kind of like, I don't want to do that because he's him, Ramsey's Ramsey, and I don't want to be essentially on his bad side. But it's like, yeah, the man he doesn't look after you these past few decades. What did he do? He gave you the scraps. This man is a bad guy. We need to just remove him from the board. And Sophie kind of goes a little bit deeper into her situation with Ramsey. Ramsey was her mentor, her first mentor, but it's like, no, he wasn't just, I interpreted it as like that, but it's like, at least he wants to treat me more like I'm his property. And for her, it's like, I had to do everything. I had to burn every bridge just to get away from him. And I wonder, is it in the fact, and she never really explained that, but I'm curious, is it a thing of she basically had to call in every favor to do it, or is it more so like just to make herself so toxic to him that he'd never want to be close to her, she had to destroy every situation she could be in? I mean, it's probably just also like, right, the life I built for myself, everything that I had that had any connection to Ramsey that he knew of or was aware of, I had to burn it. That's what Astrid's doing in all of this. It's like, right, because if Ramsey doesn't get taken down, he's going to keep, because they're like, right, if Ramsey doesn't get taken down, he's going to keep coming after Sophie, and then Astrid's going to be the collateral damage. So, you know, and that's been a major theme of this season is collateral damage. So, and that's for Sophie was a big thing when she was talking to Harry. He's like, yeah, I'm going to have to steep head first into a lot of my collateral damage. So, and Sophie did have like a face-to-face with her daughter, but it has been, once again, stepdaughter Astrid, but it has been 20 years and they haven't met face-to-face, but once again, she has kept an eye. And in fact, apparently she's kind of nudged certain criminals, well, Astrid towards certain criminals. And it's like, as a criminal yourself, it is kind of like, it is kind of weird that you would do that. There was also this line I thought was so interesting where it's like, oh, Harry, you don't need to act like that. You need to be kind of very dismissive and downright mean. And Parker's like, you want him to be Nate? And she's like, no. But it's like, a part of me is like, yeah, those sounds like a lot of Nate qualities. And even at one point in time where she was basically like, oh, I'm going to take down, I'm going after Ramsey, and when I do, I'm going to win. I was like, that statement, maybe I'm the only one that felt that. I was like, that felt like a Nate line. That felt like, oh, I was like, because I was worried like and I think the end result still plays this way, but this is very personal to her, just like, Nate had some personal cases too. I mean, the first season was probably the most personal case for him. The season 4 situation was the season 4 one became extremely personal, but it's like those have been the most personal situations for him. The season 1 situation and the season 4, those became the most pertinent and the most personal for him. And that's the problem. Like when it becomes personal like that, you do get blinded. And to some extent, I think you can make the argument Sophie did get blinded because she was just so focused on taking down Ramsey, she couldn't see the other plays that were happening, but we'll get to that soon enough. I also think it is fascinating and Ramsey wasn't in his episode much. I felt like, because I figured it's like, oh, this is going to be a 2-parter, but then I was like, oh, everything kind of got resolved, and we got our twist at the end. I was like, oh, it is going to be a 2-parter. But I thought Ramsey was going to be a bigger part of this. He's only in like a couple scenes. He's in maybe like, what? Maybe 10 minutes of the episode or something like that. This episode's like on a slightly shorter than the other episodes, I think. This one's only like 40 minutes. I think the others were like at least like, 42 or something. Like it was just a couple minutes shorter that I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because there was only like 2 ads where there normally is at least 3 in an episode. Well, 2 ad breaks when there's normally 3 ad breaks. But I love the plan involved them. I love stuff like that where basically they recreated the museum and the restoration room, but they did it on the floor like above or something like that. I made like kind of a decent enough copy, just kind of on a short notice. Initially, they only had like an hour because the whole point was like bringing in like Elliot had to call in his ordnance guy, which I love. Brianna's like, man, that's like, wow, I can't believe you did it. But it's also so very you. That's very like on brand for you, but still, wow. And then later on, they're like, oh, wow, we can only get an hour. He's like, really? He's like, you guys asked, can we get like an explosive? And I'm the one that was like, yo, I could get an ordnance guy on top of this with no question to ask in a short amount of time. Did anyone else have their hands up? No one else has got their hands up about how to deal with this. So the Hurt Locker guy, as Elliot kind of put it, which I've never seen that movie. Wasn't that Jeremy Renner in that too? I feel like that's one of the movies he's kind of like best known for. Either way, he ended up taking that guy's position, and I love when he's trying to do the accent thing, because I noticed, like, obviously him and Brianna did it a little earlier in the episode. I love that he's trying to say something, and it's like, oh, that sounds very, like, South African, and then it's like, oh, that sounds very Scotty talking to Kirk, and it's just like, Sophie trying to get him to, like, enunciate the words right. And I love that he was just like, he's also like, get the boys to pray for me or something like that. And then later on he's eating an apple and it's like, oh, if I don't make it, tell Clara that I always loved her or something like that. I was like, I love that you're enjoying this. And obviously when he's all said and done, he gets out, like, they're like, oh my God, he disarmed it and everything. Let's get a crane in here to get it out. But I'm like, I love when Elliot just gets these roles where he's kind of, once again, whether it's like the hockey situation, whether it's the baseball situation, whether it's this, when he kind of gets like serenaded and praised like a hero. I always think that's super dope. I just love that like Elliot has those moments out of any of the characters the most. Like I said earlier, he's not in the episode long, but like our introduction to Ramsey, you're just like, man, they made it clear in a couple minutes that he's on screen how much of a scumbag he is, and just like you can tell like why Sophie hates him so much, because he's just kind of like, oh yeah, my protege, I basically taught you how to survive. And she's like, yeah, you taught me how to survive you, prove, because she's like, I'm not you. Essentially, because it's like, yeah, you wanted me to kind of be a mini you, and I'm not. And just the fact is that also like he's extremely paranoid because he can tell something's off of Billy because he knows Billy enough. Because like I guess it's almost like when Billy's like, oh no, come on, he's like, no, why are you barking orders at me? What's up with this? Something's off about this. But I do love that because Sophie knows him well enough, she was ready for everything. It's like, right, they 3D printed it, which I love that 3D printer came up. It's like apparently because they used that last season, at least one of the earlier cases, right? They used the 3D printer, I think. But yeah, like Hardison loved it so much that basically all the international teams apparently have one now because of it. But it's like Sophie knew he looked for a very specific painting, and they 3D printed the one of her and her husband and her stepdaughter. So I was like, all right, it kind of fed the story enough to keep him going. And she also knew well enough to know which one was going to be the death mask. So they made a fake death mask that he would hold on to just in case. Like, it's like, it always makes you wonder, like, how much do you calculate for? Did you know that he was going to break the mask and leave? Was that plan B? I mean, it was already kind of set up to be like that the moment he left, Parker rolls up and it's like, Astrid. And she's like, Parker. Which I also love that even the curator's like, wait, Parker? As in the Parker? I was like, I mean, I think sometimes I legitimately do underestimate how internationally famous Parker is. Like, her name carries so much weight in the thief world because she is the one, not even one of the greatest thief in the world. So it's understandable, but it's still sometimes just, I was like, oh, it's like when Parker, like, wait, Parker? Wait, the Parker? I love that there's just like, yeah. And that's enough for Ash. She's like, she waves to her. I guess Astrid knows what Parker looks like. I guess she's, well, I mean, I guess like Parker's publicly enough known now that people know what she looks like. So when Astrid sees her, chases after her, turns into a little chase sequence, kind of dragging her along, and she ends up running into Ramsey, which Ramsey's kind of been one of her number one targets. Which I'm curious. I do probably think Parker probably is number one on her list. Ramsey was probably like a close second or something like that. But it's like, because Ramsey specifically destroyed her family because of his con and everything. Her dad went into drinking and eventually died from it all. So she really, so, you know, he might be on a different level from Parker, because Parker's more like oh, you're a criminal and I'm going to take you down. Ramsey is like, no, there's personal stakes in this, which I think that's kind of an interesting theme of this episode too. It is like, you know, personal for Sophie and ends up being personal for Astrid in that regard too. So taking down Ramsey meant a lot to her. For Ramsey, it's coming like, I got had by that person. It's like, yeah, you thought you outclassed her, but she easily outclassed you, because I think he's egotistical enough to think he's better than Sophie, and she, because, you know, I think it's also from the benefit of she's not the same person that she was. I did appreciate it that Billy did stick up for her and got hit in the face for it, but she's like, no, that was actually really sweet of you. We're good. Now get out of here. Don't get caught by the cops and stuff like that. So, because he was afraid of getting arrested, because it meant like, right, I actually won't be, like, now that like his daughter is okay after the whole, you know, kind of getting pulled out of the cult situation she was in episode before last. I think that was wasn't that episode 10, I believe? I think he is potentially going to take this opportunity. Now he's actually from underneath Ramsey's thumb, that he's actually going to, I think, be more present in his daughter's life, even though he's like kind of line manipulating the leverage team to do what, because even she was like, yeah, I found out, even when I found out about your true motives, I didn't handle you the way Ramsey would have if he had found out that you had tricked him like that. So, but Parker was happy at the end of it all, being like, well, I'll let Astrid have this, because like, right, we're square, because she is family, because also like, right, she did end up taking down like a very bad guy like Ramsey. So it's like, yeah, I recognize them more so as family. So gonna let kind of like that nemesis thing they've got going on kind of go. I mean, at least on Parker's side of things, even though she doesn't want to acknowledge that she recognizes like the nemesis thing isn't just a one-way street. Like, oh, I'm their nemesis, they're not my nemesis, you know, type of thing. But it's like, yeah, it works both ways, Parker, whether you want to admit it or not. So we'll see whether that keeps going or not. And I get the feeling like it probably will. They have to interact with each other. Like, Astrid has to work with the team next episode or something. It hasn't, like, you know, it does make you wonder, I mean, no, because it's been so long, like, painting or no painting, when it's all those years and it's Sophie using a different voice, kind of hiding her face a little bit, like, yeah, it's enough to kind of throw you off, because because I don't know how much she really knows about Sophie and what she does, that, you know, Sophie knows how to disarm people and make people see her a certain way. which, once again, seeing what you want to see ends up being another thematic element to this, where it's like, oh, it worked with the mask, but it also ended up being the end result for all this, because for Sophie, it's like, yeah, there's still some loose ends. Like, Ramsey wasn't the one who ratted out the London team, but who did? Because obviously the London team was tricked into doing this for him, kind of a trial run to get the death mask. But it's like, who ratted them out? Turns out it's Arthur. Like, oh, like, it's like, that's a thread we kind of let go earlier in the episode. I mean, it came back because of Billy, him saying it was Arthur, but it was actually Ramsey and stuff like that. So, either way, Arthur set all of this up. He knew exactly how to manipulate her. Yeah, it is happenstance that they ran into each other in the States, and now he set all this in motion, because it's like, yeah, I went to jail, now I'm going to make you go to jail. Like, it's like, man, I mean, I get it. Like, a lot of your life was taken away from you, and you're angry and petty at them. So I could definitely see Sophie, when it comes to Arthur, leaning into even the more, like, I felt she was a little Nate-ish in this episode. I can feel her going full-blown Nate when it comes to Arthur next episode or something, you know? But they are in quite the predicament because, right, the alarm's going off, the cops are coming, so... And him being so smug about it, and it does kind of rub you the wrong way, but it's like, yeah, I think... Once again, she was just so focused on taking down Ramsey, she didn't see the situation of like, cool, we're being used. Which, obviously, the leverage team has been in that situation a few times now where they've been used and manipulated. Going back to season 4, that ended up being the main staple for season 4 in that regard. Was like, yeah, people, that guy benefiting from the bad guys that they took down. Saul Rubinick's character being the one that kind of set a lot of that emotion. I can't remember his character's name off the top of my head. The next episode is the season finale, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this ultimately all ends up playing out, how the team finds a way out of this, how they end up going about taking down Arthur, the Astrid element to all of this, like whether her and Sophie have a face-to-face, under what capacity. Once again, will the team be working with Astrid in this regard to take Arthur down? We'll ultimately have to wait to see, because this is like the ultimate, all of this is kind of like the ultimate conclusion of Sophie facing her past to some extent. So, and once again, like, will this be the end of the road for Harry? Will, he kind of just go back to his regular work, or what? Because this is supposed to be kind of like the last job type of situation. So it's definitely, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how this season ultimately ends up wrapping up. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.